Welcome, sales associates and budding sales or aspiring sales professionals to Property Careers Prospector School online. And today we're going to talk or share some discussion in and around working with buyers. And buyers in a market that has been one, I've got to say, that let's face it, you've had more buyers than you have available property. So one could only imagine just how cooperative they are. But that might change, changes in environments, and certainly even now with just about every sector of real estate, fortunately or unfortunately, into a lockdown of some description. And for some areas, no end in sight. Some of you might be wondering, what are we going to do about this? And last week we talked about, the fact that how you react to the market, how you present it. Just a quick reminder, if we had more, we'd sell more. That's always the answer to give. But of course, as it pertains to buyers and everything going forward, we're going to see, I think what the best thing for all of us to do, given the state of, COVID and its net effect on the real estate market is, and I hope you're writing this down, is to assume the worst and then hope for the best. Now, what do I mean by assuming the worst? I don't want us to be pessimists. As I said, there's enough negativity out there as it is, especially in the real estate market, and enough reluctance without us and we're seeing all of us as sales professionals to add to that fray by presenting it in a negative fashion. And, from where you sit, your reactive behavior can be as simplistic. There's a lot of people, a lot of real estate agents at the moment that are kind of sitting on the fence waiting for, restrictions and everything to lift so that they can go at the real estate market again. But at the moment, they're looking at this as somewhat of a holiday. Well, I think there's some freedoms involved, and I think that you've got to keep yourself sane. And part of that is making sure that, from day to day, you're still living your life and doing all those sorts of things. But, I reckon you get two choices with this. You can either, and this is the way that I'm presenting it, certainly with everyone that I work with on a one-on-one basis, and those of you that I work with inside of Property Careers PC3M, which is the, monitor, manage and mentor. Those that are working inside of sales trainer, mentor, I'm saying the same things to those sales professionals. You've got to look at the opportunity and what appears to be adversity. I say that you can either run from it, or you can sit this one out, or you can run at it. And you can run at it looking for the opportunities that exist and then shape it the right way. Certainly with buyers, I find that real estate agents are making some cardinal errors with them already. I'm the first to tell you that I believe that markets are going to change, that you won't see this oversupply, this undersupply, I should say, a lack of properties on the market. And then, of course, buyers, the moment they see one, are willing to commit. So it's been relatively simple. I think that will change. And I think that as markets become oversupplied, one of the dangers I see real estate agents make is that they start to pander to buyers. They start to pander them in the respect that they are way too quick to, want to make everything fit the buyer's arrangements. I mean, some things are maxims, they just don't change, as we were talking about last week. Never lose sight of the fact that buyers want a home. And as they say, home is where the heart is. It's an emotional purchase. So it's fair for me to say that when you are communicating with buyers, especially given that they only do this, or they only conduct this type of transaction 1, 3, 4, 5 times in their lives, and given that the mode of operation is vastly changing, I know that in some areas, I was speaking to some agents down in Victoria this morning, and they're making it very clear to me that down there, I mean, they can't show properties at all whilst they're locked down, and that's fairly draconian. But I believe that has to change. I mean, the longer this is drawn out, you're going to have to figure a way to function inside of this. Certainly, what we're saying to salespeople is to utilize some fantastic marketing mediums, especially as they relate to sellers, not least of which is two-view websites, which you can, kind of have the market, the property off market, but it really is on the market, and still be promoting it out there. This, of course, can glean the attention of other sellers. One of the things that if you're working side by side with a salesperson, or you're actually doing these open for inspections yourself, a lot of us are prohibited from running open homes the way that we were. Some of the people that I'm working with are doing a fabulous job of just setting those open for inspections up on the weekend. Setting the inspections up, I should say, much the same way as an open home. The only difference is that they sort of running a series of inspections or a block of inspections from a certain time to a certain time. I mean, I've had some of my charges where they've actually had a property open, they've had 14 inspections through, and they've all been individual. They've just booked them back to back when the people turn up outside the property. So to me, this functions in the very same way that an open home does, notwithstanding the fact that you bring these people through one-on-one. And I think there's great opportunity here, because this is what I was accustomed to many years ago. When open homes weren't nearly as prevalent as they are now, and we indeed did take buyers out on a one-on-one arrangement. But this, of course, means that you have to be selective around that. Now, just getting back to mimicking the open home, I would still be promoting the property as open. Again, only that you've got to have different slot times. I know that you can't do this in Victoria just yet, but I would be preparing for it. And then what I would also be doing is still distributing the welcome home or open for inspection, if you're doing it, invitation. The only difference is that you're not opening that property for a set time slot, but I would still be making sure that the invitation was going out to 50 properties around that listing, with the wording that is clearly inviting incumbent active property sellers researching the market ahead of selling. Openly invite them to call you, talk about the property, and wherever possible, get them through it so that they can run the comparison with their own, and then look, I hope, favorably upon listing the property with you or the salesperson that you're supporting. So it's very important that we're actually still trying to function as best we can around the prospecting protocols that we've got deemed for ourselves, not least of which are those that are contained inside the regenerative prospecting process. Now, to buyers, with buyers, of course, if you're going to be setting up these inspections, you really want to be aware of the quality of that buyer, how close you are to making a match, understanding their needs and wants. And more than ever before, you can't just leave it to chance where you're opening the property and hoping the buyer stumbles in. You are instead asking questions and trying to match that particular buyer across to sellers. Again, as a prospecting value, if you are getting as much information about these individual buyers as you can then talk to active property sellers that might have something that's suitable, and then set them up so that you can bring those buyers to their properties. And again, this might cause many of those sellers to actively want to bring the property on and list it with you. So I want to talk about buyers and the controlled communications that you have with them, about understanding, first and foremost. I don't know if many of you have done a lot of work with buyers, but unlike the business of listing properties, where it's largely about your skill in, once of course, creating definitive rapport and making that connection with them, then going out and presenting. This is very heavily skilled, this area. But I can tell you that working with buyers is by and large a process that relies on probability. Again, I ask you to pay very close attention to this as I start to explain it. So it's generally thought that, that you should, again in the old days, that you should qualify a buyer's capacity to purchase and their budget before you see any further with them. I mean, it's a crude routine, it's rather blunt, but you've got to remember, and this is an important point, and it's one that we want to get to fairly quickly when dealing with any buyer, is that most buyers are moving from somewhere else. And certainly if they're moving within the area, you are on display to a potential active property seller, and you want that to become favorable. And even if you're not in this instance, even if they've already committed to another agent or sold, you know, should you be successful in moving them into the area, or even if they buy through another agent, in years to come, you want to be, when they do eventually come around to sell, you want to be the first port of call that they rely upon, that they come to in the event that they want to sell. So I always, you know, for me, I've always believed that you need to be transparent around this. You need to be very open with the fact that we are paid by property sellers, and therefore our allegiance is almost immediately aligned with sellers ahead of buyers. This is not a bad thing, but it's also needs to be understood that productivity is stimulated by activity. So if I even come back to a lot of the protocols that you've worked with your prospective sellers, one of the things that, you know, many of you that work one-on-one with me, I'll talk about the fact that we need to have passive communication in place. That being SMS texting the sales results as they happen in real time. That being sending a market roundup each month. That being any new listings that you have come up or any activity, getting that across to sellers, because it's basically activity, yeah, that stimulates productivity. You see, if sellers can see evidence of sales occurring, especially right now, if you're not working over with your buyers, if you're not jumping on the phone, reaffirming them, if you're not then presenting those buyers back to active property sellers, and if they're not seeing evidence by way of, you know, maybe texting sales as they're coming through, you know, sending a market roundup each month and giving them information around this, you know, a lot of sellers can kind of assume, oh, the lockdowns kind of put everything into a stall. They sort of delay any plans that they have. And this is unnecessary. We want the beat to go on. So one of the assurances you've got to give sellers is showing them the activity. And in order to make that activity a reality, you need to stimulate that with any prospective buyer that you have out there in the market, and even any active property seller that's researching the market. And that means showing them properties. This is not a bad thing. Having said all that, at the very same time, you still want to be engaging wherever possible qualification protocols. Now, as you probably have already guessed, the first port of call that I want to establish with any prospective buyer is, are they local? Do they have a property that they will be considering selling either now or immediately after finding a property of, you know, that they want to move to? Or they could just be researching the area and moving out of area, but they're researching not just, you know, where their property sits value wise, but also having a look at what agents are out there. And I'll say this again slowly. I know I did say it last week, but it's very important that you understand this. There is always another buyer. So for me, I don't get too stressed about buyers. I certainly don't get stressed, notwithstanding the fact that as markets become more oversupplied, you might think, well, buyers are in the box office. But I happen to know, because it's an emotional purchase, that despite the fact that there might be a lot of properties on the market, and in fact, believe it or not, even though an oversupply drives prices down, it does have the net effect, sadly, of confusing buyers. You see, one of the worst things you can do to a buyer is give them too many choices, because this promotes procrastination, or worse, indecision, where they can't make a call on a property, and some of them start to really sit back and wait for the perfect property in the perfect location with all the right circumstances that surround it. Hasn't happened yet. Yes, I know that, because at the moment, demand is still exceeding supply, but you have to figure out this in preparation. And there's no better time for you to start looking through all of the skills that you need to focus upon to make this work. So in the first instance, I would be looking at, wherever I can, promoting activity, because this stimulates listing activity that you can then share with active property sellers. So I wouldn't be too heavy-handed on the qualification in lieu of actually getting people to look at properties and you're not doing anything else, and activities so important. So I say, you want to sell homes, not property or houses. This is an important thing that you need to remember in all of your language, all of your discussion with buyers. Again, we talked about this last week insofar as the market goes. Remember, they want the best home that they can afford within the context of their budget. So in language, the two words that we're constantly using in tandem, first and foremost, is home. And we use the word home in the context of how they feel about it. So don't ever use the words with a buyer. What do you think? What do you think of the location? What do you think of the price? What do you think you do with it? They call the last thing you want any buyer doing is thinking about things, because sadly this starts to kick in with logic and that could end up leading to procrastination. With of course feelings, if they're feeling their way home, especially when they see the property that they fall for, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but they sort of get a glazed expression once this happens and they look like a rabbit in the spotlight. So it is so important that before they get to that point, that you have engaged in all the right dialogue, all the right explanations of things, so sort of preempting that they will reach this position. So one of the things I used to do, which I'll talk about, not today, but I'll talk about a little bit later, is that, for us, I had to, when they find a property they like, the next move is to get, an offer and acceptance, but then move them in to signing a contract for sale. Now, this contract for sale had a cooling off period, but I would actually give them a live contract. It was a dummy contract, and explain that this is the document that they would sign and how it worked before they actually found the property. I was afforded this opportunity because I used to take these people out in cars. Now, with COVID, you're still going to be meeting these people at the property. And I think this is a great topic of conversation. I basically, when I get to the house and they're having a look and you're having that conversation, I'll say, look, has anyone actually talked to you about what happens once you do find the property? And I would introduce them to a contract. I'd show them this is what they're going to do. Because when they do see the property and they get that glazed expression and all sense of logic leaves them, and in fact, the danger is that procrastinations can start to kick in. If they're aware of the process and what they've got to go through before it actually happens, they become way more cooperative. And coincidentally, this is something that we're going to talk about in just a moment as it relates to the characteristics that you want to be looking for. So I say, focus on activity, not results. Don't be looking at every buyer just definitive around a sale. I think that activity is great because it stimulates all the productivity that you want. It keeps you busy. It's good stories and associations to tell. If that buyer does have a property and they can glean some trust in the way that you've been servicing them, it can create some obligation for them to list with you. So to me, activity is the most important thing in this environment, that you figure out how to keep the whole process moving forward, getting people to inspections, getting offers across to owners, reassuring incumbent property sellers that should they list, that we can still get activity around their property. All of these things are important. Now, even if I was in Victoria, I would still be talking to buyers. I would be getting them, if you've got any images or you can create any connections, even if you can arrange for them to do a drive-by, so long as the property is listed, a drive-by in lieu of them coming on later and having a look at it. This is all good activity. So I say it's service, not swervice. Don't start to avoid people. Certainly don't put your feet up. Don't think, oh, I'll just wait for all this to clear, because I think these lockdowns that we're in at the moment are going to be there for a lot longer than we even think. So for me, it's all about selecting buyers, and when you're getting inquiry, I would be encouraging loads of telephone inquiry, loads of information. So I'd be on all of the advertisements that I'm putting out there and be very welcoming about people calling you directly. And I'll just show you how some very clever techniques can work so that you can ascertain fairly readily the position of that buyer and where they stand and the quality of that buyer and how it works. And it's going to sound very simplistic. The technique that you need to engage there is one where you run an assumption, and it's almost like a negative assumption, and you wait for them to correct you. And it's how they correct you that tells you the quality of that buyer. Fairly clever. All you got to do this, and this is probably why I'm so bloody good at it, is you just got to be prepared to look a little bit dumb. It's actually the smartest thing that you can do. So when a call's put through to me, certainly any information that's already surrendered, I don't ask for that again. So if I was in the office or it was being relayed from the office, or if it's coming directly to my mobile phone, I would just answer the phone. I'd say, like, hi, my name's Mark Dwyer. Good morning, good afternoon, Mark Dwyer speaking. When the person started to actually run, if they said, look, I've just seen a sign, or I've just seen an advertisement, or I've just driven past a property or at a certain address, I would then just feign English and, oh, I'm sorry, did you want to buy a house? Now, I'll just run that by you again. I'm sorry, did you want to buy a house? Now, as nutty as you might think that is, it's fairly clever, because I've actually had people, when I said, do you want to buy a house? They go, well, of course, stupid, this is a real estate agency, isn't it? Now, I can almost tell you, if somebody says it like that, that is a buyer that is ready to go. Why do I know that? Because I said, do you want to buy a house, do you? And they go, yeah. Now, once they say, yeah, of course, this is a real estate agency, isn't it? Well, some of them might just say, yeah, well, if I can, I would buy one. No, yes. I'll then say, not today, I hope. I hate high pressure buyers. Now, some of you might feel a bit awkward saying that, but I just want to show you what I did there. What I said was, I don't want you don't want to buy a house, do you? They've got to qualify themselves as a buyer. The way they answer that, if they're very dismissive of me, then, well, of course, well, this is what do you mean, stupid? But that tells me that they are ready to buy, because somebody who's not will just go, oh, no, we're just looking at the moment. Now, for me, the first bell that goes off there is this could be a prospective seller, an active property seller, researching the market. I'm going to handle them a little differently. Or if they say, well, we're on the hunt at the moment, but not quite ready, and they might give you the whole story. But again, if you run an interrogative thing, if you looked at them and said, if I was to find you the house today, would you be in a position to proceed? That's not going to work. Because again, Australians and New Zealanders, culturally speaking, don't respond well to interrogation. So if your questions are interrogative, that can be off-putting. But if you just run an assumptive close, that will give you'll be able to glean the quality of that buyer and qualification. Now, that's not all. I mean, they might be willing to buy if they found the right house today, and they might even be under the impression that they could do it. But there's going to be things that are going to change around that. Some of them have had approval for financing arrangements that, quite frankly, could change. They mightn't have been near a financial institution for 6 or 8 months. And if they go back, they might find that their lending criteria has changed and they're not qualified to actually go ahead and do it. So again, we have to start feeling this out. And I look, if you're writing this down, for 5 very distinct characteristics in each buyer that, in my opinion, dramatically improve the probability of them buying should I make the match to the property that they're looking for. The first is that they are cooperative. See, I say the buyers that allow you to help them, they can be a little bit agitated with the whole process. They can be, some cases at the moment, like a little bit reticent to thinking, oh, it's just too hard. And you've got to encourage them. But at the same time, they've got to allow you to control the process. So I explain the best way for them to find a property, and this allows me to control the purchase process. So I might say to them, look, I know it's difficult with COVID at the moment. I'm fully aware of all the properties that we have on the market. I'm even aware of those that are in an off-market arrangement that are coming on. So the more you can tell me about the type of home that appeals to you and what you're looking for, the more I'm able to make that fit a little bit better. Because the only other thing I can do is sit you down and go from one through to our whole inventory and bring you through a whole lot of properties that you don't like, only to have you become even more despondent around that. So the more you can tell me here, the more likely we are to get you to the home that appeals to you. So the first thing I want to know is, are they cooperative? Buyers that start telling me how they're going to run the process, I don't believe that they're buyers. I just believe they're time wasters. Having said that, be careful. They could be active property sellers researching the market. And as I've said many, many times before, there's always another buyer, but there's rarely a second chance with a seller. So remember that you could be on display to a prospective seller. The second characteristic I'm looking for is that they are decided on that particular area. So, because one of the worst things that can happen is that buyers are looking at the properties with you, you feel like you're getting close, everything's looking hunky-dory, they wander off to another neighboring suburb or a few suburbs away where the house prices are significantly lower and they find more bang for their buck. And next minute they ring you, they're saying, look, we found a house in so and so. It's just about everything we want. We've bought it. So I'm looking for them to have a reason to particularly buy in a certain area, even if it's something as simple as that. They're all the houses that have always appealed to them. So I even say to them in questioning, I might say at some stage, you know, you can get a better house in another area, and just see how they respond. But if they have a need to be there because of neighbours or other members of the family, or their work is in that area, or there are schools that they want to fall into the catchment area of, or they need to be very close to certain modes of transport, that for me is music to my ears, because I know they're locked into that area and the probability is going to work well. The next thing I want to know is, are they reasonable? So that's two. First, of course, is that they're cooperative. The second is that they're decided on an area. Number three characteristic I'm looking for is that they are reasonable, that they are willing to pay a fair price for a right home. Now, this is the vast majority of buyers. I must say this, as I've said to you before, there's only one question. So there's only one issue I'm saying when a buyer becomes interested in a property that I don't have an answer for. I can maximize the value parameter of a property, but if they turn around and say to me they can't afford it, there really is no answer for that. But if they like a property, they will stretch themselves beyond the level of what everyone thinks is reasonable, so long as you are clever in representing that value parameter. So if somebody starts a conversation by telling me that they're looking for a bargain or they're looking for something cheap, I just go in the other direction, really. I might utilize those people in terms of activity around properties. And of course, I'm also very much checking for whether or not they have a property that they want to bring to market. There are some unusual people out there that they want the world for theirs, but expect to be able to buy a bargain. This is just a nonsense, but we still might have to entertain that. So that's it. So that they're reasonable around their expectations of what they have to pay. The next one is that they're realistic on the type of property that they're looking for. So when they're describing the type of property that they're looking for me, if they said that they wanted, say, a 4-bedroom, some sort of formal living area, ensuite, that sort of stuff, close to shops and schools and transport, they just described for me 80 to 90% of the properties that I have listed. So the probability of me being able to put them into a property is very, very high. If they start the conversation by saying that they're looking for something special or they're looking for something unique, whilst this might have some value in other ways, certainly for prospecting, it has some value, but the probability of them buying is very, very low, because the number of properties that you list that are unique compared to the vast majority of them that are kind of standard to that area, there's a huge contrast there. So I'm looking for buyers. I say unique buyers buy unique property, where realistic buyers buy most properties that you have for sale. And then last but by no means least, they have a deadline. I'm okay with a buyer that seems agitated with the process. If I was to put this into simple context, when we had buyers come into the property, or they would come into the office years ago before taking them out to look at, and if they kind of used only the front part of the seat, or they were tapping or fidgeting or playing with keys, fidgeters are generally action prone. This would tell me that they have a deadline, that they're working toward having to find something within a certain time parameter. This again is music to my ears when we talk about characteristics that buyers have. So there it is. That's a good start. I'll continue some conversation on this next week when I start to talk about the signs to look for when you're bringing buyers through a property that tell you whether or not this is the one, the closing questions that you can run by them, and how you get them across. So just to recap on those characteristics that we're looking for and what I call the initial qualifying question. The 5 characteristics that we're looking for with buyers is that they basically are cooperative, that they allow you to show them how to go about the process of locating and buying a home. So we're using the words feel and home all the way, that they're definitely decided on area and not looking at a cheaper area that can end up being disappointing for you, that they're reasonable in their expectation of what that property is likely to cost and that they are comfortable with that, that they're realistic around the type of property that they're looking for and not focused on unique properties. And of course, the last one is that they have a deadline. With the quick qualifier, when they're calling me, the dialogue is relatively simple. When a buyer calls up and they tell me that they've seen a sign and they're asking about a property, I just feign a little bit of ignorance with that assumptive clause as, I'm sorry, did you want to buy a house? And how they handle that initial question allows me to then move to when they say, yeah, well, of course, you, but they say, not today, I hope. I hate high pressure buyers. Just see how they react. And if they go on and talk about it, you can tell by the way they've reacted to that, where they're sitting, certainly with that deadline quality, the fact that they're being cooperative if they go on with the conversation. And then, of course, I'll move to, now, do you have something to sell? Or even better than using the word sell, I then also say, which I'll talk about more next week, but right now I just say to them, where are you moving from? And is this property that you're inquiring about, is that to compare it to your own if it happens to be local? Or is this the type of thing you're looking to buy? And they tell me. If they say, where are you moving from? And say, we haven't decided that, I just go, well, if you could move, if you could, where would you move to? The conversation must be centric to the move. The more you get them talking about the move, the more you will develop the right rapport. You develop that right rapport, you'll be at the top of the shopping list when they're starting to consider agents. Okay, we'll talk about that more next week. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've taken notes and you're starting to put all this into action. Just remember, every buyer is a seller, and everyone has that story. The question is, can you get it out of them? And this is all important as you develop your skills to becoming a better real estate salesperson. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can reach me, Mark, with a K, at propertycareers.com.au, or my phone number is +61 410 592 165. And I look forward to catching you next week at Property Careers Prospector School online.